Good evening, I'm Gotti Schwartz. Thanks so much for being back with us. Here are some of the stories we're watching this hour on Now Tonight. Severe weather strikes, blizzard conditions in the Midwest, while tornadoes touch down in Texas and Oklahoma. We're going to have the full forecast. Then the criminal charges. The SEC breaks down the charges against disgraced FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried. More on what officials are calling an orchestrated years-long fraud. Plus, 10 years later, those who lost loved ones in the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting have spent the last decade grieving, remembering, and attempting to heal. How their lives have changed since that day. We're going to speak to one family member a little bit later this hour. And we've got ignition, a major nuclear fusion breakthrough in the pursuit of the elusive energy source. What's new and what's not so new about this development? And we begin tonight with a massive winter storm that has the potential to affect more than 20 million people, with the central and southern parts of the country facing the most severe threats right now, including possible tornadoes from Texas to Mississippi. And all of this comes after several twisters were reported in Texas today. 5 people were hurt and businesses damaged. Witnesses say the storm struck fast, with winds wreaking havoc in parts of North Texas. Large hail and strong winds are expected throughout tonight. And meanwhile, there are blizzard warnings for parts of Nebraska, Wyoming, South Dakota, and Colorado, where 10 to 18 inches of snow could keep piling up into tomorrow. NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster is in Edina, Minnesota, where virtually the entire state is under some kind of winter storm warning or advisory. Shaq, how's it going out there?
Well, Gotti, right now it's just rain that we've been seeing. Earlier today, we got a little bit of a wintry mix that was expected. But, you know, the city of Minneapolis, the state of Minnesota, they have been still preparing throughout much of the day. We spent some time at a site where they were turning a large pile of sand and salt into preparations. And you see it being filled right there as they put it in the dumpster and then sent those dumpsters out and pre-positioned them throughout the city to help make sure that the evening commute was as safe as the morning commute. And you look at those precautions and you get a sense of why they exist when you look at other parts of the country, even other parts of the state. You go up about 2 hours north, 2 hours west. That's when those are areas where they're expecting up to a foot of snow. This is the same system that brought about 4 feet of snow to the west coast that led to blizzard warnings in Colorado today. This was the first time that they've experienced blizzard-like conditions in nearly 2 years. Those blizzard conditions concerning not just because of the snowfall that they have to deal with, but because of the big winds that they're dealing with that lead to those whiteout conditions and those road closures, which then lead to school closures and other delays. So this is all part of that same system that dumped a lot of snow, a lot of precipitation in the western part of the country. It's a slow-moving storm, and Minnesota is getting ready for their effect of it now.
Yeah, Shaq, and the same system that's causing a lot of severe rainstorms and tornadoes. What's going on south of you?
Yeah, so up here, this is where you're getting the snow, but the same system is bringing that severe weather to the south. And we're talking about severe weather in the form of tornadoes and reports of tornadoes. We've seen lots of damage in the Texas area. Grapevine, there was 5 people who were hospitalized because of storm-related injuries. Reports of tornadoes there that led to a Walmart, a Sam's Club being closed. And, you know, as we go into the evening hours, the threat is still persistent. You know, our weather unit says that those nocturnal tornadoes are 2.5 times more likely to be deadly than their daytime counterparts. So as we get into the evening hours, those conditions that led to that damage that you were just looking at on your screen, those conditions still persist. So many officials and many meteorologists telling people to listen to their local officials, listen to those precautions and take those precautions, because the severe weather that we saw earlier today in the south, in Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, that's only going to continue. This is a large system and it's slow moving, so people are going to be dealing with the effects of it for some time, Gotti.
Such a good reminder to stay tuned during nightfall. Thanks so much, Shaq. Now, this snow and other severe weather is expected to continue into tomorrow and throughout the rest of the week. We could see it extend into the southeast and possibly even the northeast. NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns has more on all of that. Bill, what can we expect over the next couple of days?
Yeah, we're going to deal with this storm probably through Friday. It looks like by Saturday it should be gone and heading off out into the open Atlantic. So we got 3 more days to deal with this mess. We already have significant cleanup from the tornadoes we've already seen today. We've had 6 tornado reports. We'll probably have more than that sun up tomorrow when they start doing some of the inspections to see if some of the damage was straight line winds or from a tornado. We don't have any active tornado warnings right now, but we still have a tornado watch that's going to be up with us through this evening. Some of the worst damage was just north of the Fort Worth area there and the Grapevine. Also, that was just south of Oklahoma City early this morning is when we had that tornado that devastated and went through a couple homes. And then over the last couple hours, Shreveport at one point was under a tornado warning, and tornado was on the ground only 14 miles from the city. The sirens were going off. Everyone was rushing to their shelters. Thankfully, that thunderstorm weakened and that tornado lifted off the ground before it made it to the city limits. So here's the area of concern for the rest of tonight. Tornado watch goes till 10 o'clock. They may even issue another one after this for areas of Mississippi, especially from Jackson southwards. But from now until 10 p.m., Alexandria, Natchez, Monroe, Greenville, Mississippi, a little portion there of East Texas, too, from Lufkin to the border of Louisiana, still has a chance. So here's a map showing tomorrow's risk area. So when we wake up in the morning, some of the strongest storms should be from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, Hattiesburg to Meridian. And then during the day tomorrow, those storms are going to sweep in off the Gulf of Mexico. We could even get some water spouts out of this. That's just a tornado over water. And then it will watch those storms into Alabama and possibly even up towards Panama City, Gotti, as we go throughout tomorrow afternoon. And then finally on Thursday, severe weather likely Tampa, Orlando, I-4 corridor, Jacksonville to Savannah to Charleston. Hopefully the tornado threat will be a little lower, a little more isolated instead of widespread like we've seen today with these severe storms.
And Bill, I got to ask, I know that when we were getting hit in California, I started pulling up the weather apps and you'd see the bands moving across and then you'd say, all right, well, it's almost over. And then the next day would go by and the next day it felt like we were under it for about 2 days. How long is this band happening? If somebody pulls out their phone, they start to see that they're getting hit. Right. How long are they going to be in this?
I mean, this storm is just sitting here spinning right now. So if you're in the Central Plains, I mean, we have blizzard warnings that go out to Thursday. So that's 3 days of this. Currently, the winds are howling here, Rapid City to North Platte. That's where the snowy side of the storm is. Where Shack is located there, Minneapolis, kind of a wintry mix around that region right now. They'll get colder in the days ahead, and they will get some frozen precipitation as the storm slides to the East Coast. Those blizzard warnings, I said, they're up till Thursday. And that's really, the roads are closed. They're telling people do not even bother trying to travel Interstate 80 or 90 here through South Dakota, through Nebraska, I-25, coming out of Colorado here into areas of Wyoming. They're saying just stay off of it. Do not travel if you don't, unless it's an extreme emergency, because they're worried about people getting stranded. We've been telling people there is chance of 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Well, take a look at this. In the last hour, Rapid City has a wind gust of 61 miles per hour. So that's coming true, Gotti. And also, we have flash flooding to deal with, too. That's going to last through tomorrow. And finally, nor'easter Thursday, Friday in the Northeast, but we'll talk more about that come tomorrow.
I mean, the weather week is just getting started. Thanks so much, Bill.
Yes.
Sam Bankman-Fried, the CEO of the collapsed crypto exchange FTX, faces widespread fraud charges as prosecutors unsealed a criminal indictment today. He faces 8 counts ranging from wire fraud to money laundering. And Bankman-Fried has been charged with lying to investors from the time he launched his company. Today, a judge in the Bahamas denied him bail, saying he poses a flight risk. And joining us now is CNBC technology reporter Mackenzie Sagalos. Mackenzie, you have been very busy. I've read your byline so many times today. What can you tell us about the charges? I know he was arrested by Bahamian authorities at the behest of the Justice Department, but is he facing any charges in the Bahamas right now, or is this just a U.S. thing?
This is just a U.S. thing at this point. Authorities in the Bahamas have not charged him with anything, but he is going to be in a prison in Nassau until February 8th, which is the date of his next hearing. And it's still unclear whether Bankman-Fried will be headed stateside at that point, because unless he waives his rights, he has the right to appeal this extradition process. And I hear from legal experts that's something that could take months, if not years. So the legal wheels, the wheels of justice do not start until he gets back to the States, until a trial begins. And at this point, the biggest legal hurdle is just getting him back to the U.S. You know, Gaddy, in terms of the legality side of this, it's all being orchestrated from the U.S., and there have been a lot of moving parts here in D.C. and New York today. First, you have this big team effort between the SEC, the CFTC, the DOJ, and the FBI. It's something you would expect to see in a high-profile case like this. The new CEO, John Ray, also testified for 4 hours before the House Financial Services Committee, saying, you know, SBF was just involved in old-fashioned embezzlement. The scheme was not sophisticated at all.
Huh. What's the latest with the hedge fund attached to this, Alameda? Could we be looking at other people also possibly facing charges as well?
Right. So Alameda is tied up with this fraud scheme that prosecutors have pointed to. They say that this relationship between Sam Bankman-Fried's crypto exchange, FTX, and his sister company, that hedge fund called Alameda Research, they say that the commingling of customer deposits there, the customer deposits that were from the FTX exchange that were then transferred over to Alameda Research, is extremely problematic. It's at the center of what investigators have been looking into, both in terms of these criminal charges, but also the civil filing that we saw from the SEC and the CFTC today. It's really at the epicenter of what's going on. In terms of further charges, that's certainly something that they left the door open to. During that press conference earlier, prosecutors said that, you know, they are in the midst of this inquiry. It's not over yet. It's expansive, and so we don't know the full extent of what's going on. I spoke to one lawyer who said that for the level of expediency that we've seen in terms of these charges, it likely means that somebody within the inner circle of FTX did chime in, is perhaps cooperating in the background.
And Kinsey, I think I remember very early on in all of this, SBF talking about how sorry he was and how he was going to try to make things right. About those billions lost, is there any talk of massive civil action? Is there any chance that crypto investors or holders that were using FTX could ever see any of their money again?
Well, I think that that's the basis of, you know, we've talked about the civil repercussions, the criminal charges that have come up. And then you've got the class action lawsuits. And there have already been multiple that have come, you know, you've seen a lot of investors come together. And they're not just targeting Sam Bankman-Fried or the exchange itself. They're also saying, hey, you know, you athletes and celebrities who tethered your reputation to this exchange, we trusted you. And so they have also been the target of these lawsuits. So it remains to be seen how that's going to play out. In terms of recovering those customer funds, one thing that came up today with the new FTX CEO when he was giving testimony, he said, you know, these things that Sam Bankman-Fried have been saying about how the U.S. exchange is totally solvent, people should be able to get all of their money back. He said that's simply not true.
Kinsey, thank you so very much. Your Twitter feed has been invaluable for all of us watching this. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Gaddy.
And today we got some new data on inflation, and while prices are still sky high, the inflation rate is slowing down. In fact, while consumer prices rose last month 7.1% in November compared to last year, it was still the slowest year-over-year pace since last December. Still, inflation remains higher than what the White House, the Federal Reserve, or just about anyone spending money wants right now. And despite this, the president remains optimistic that prices will look more normal by the end of the year.
It's going to take time to get inflation back to normal levels as we make the transition to a more stable and steady growth. But we could see setbacks along the way as well. We shouldn't take anything for granted. But what is clear is that my economic plan is working, and we're just getting started.
And Caleb Silver, editor-in-chief of Investopedia, joins us now. Caleb, what jumps out from these numbers?
Well, we are seeing a deceleration, which is something we've been wanting to see for a while. Started to pick up a few months ago, but now you see a real deceleration in consumer prices, but not across the boards. If you look at food costs, they were up 0.5% last month. Shelter costs up 0.6%. Those costs keep on rising, but energy prices keep on falling. Believe it or not, oil prices are lower today than they were before Russia invaded Ukraine last February. That's driven gas prices down. That's a meaningful part of the consumer price index. So we're seeing a nice deceleration. It's probably going to take, as the president said, several months, if not the full balance of 2023, to get us down to that target rate of 2%. That's where the Federal Reserve, our central bank, that's where they want to see inflation. We're a far cry from that still.
And Caleb, you were just talking about the shelter numbers. One of the key drivers is housing, rent prices. How much of a factor is that going to play into national inflation data?
It's a pretty big factor when you think about where we spend our money as households. We spend it on our homes, whether we're servicing a mortgage, paying that monthly charge, or we're paying rent. And what you've seen in the housing market's been very interesting. Over the last year, the 30-year fixed rate for borrowing a house for a mortgage, that has doubled to over 6% right now, which has pushed a lot of people into the rental market, which is why you see rental prices climbing in nearly every major city across America. So that's going to be a factor going through next year. Why? Because we're still going to see very high mortgage rates as the Federal Reserve continues to raise interest rates. They're going to raise interest rates again tomorrow, probably 0.5%. They'll do it again in January. They'll do it again in March.
You're saying raising interest rates. We were told these inflation numbers would start to fall after the Fed started hiking up rates, and sure enough, that's what we're seeing right now. But is there any chance that we might see those rates reverse course anytime soon?
Yeah, you may see the Fed slow down or even pause or even turn around and start lowering interest rates next year. There's probably going to be a recession. Everybody's talking about it. That we're going to see slowdown across several different facets of the economy. If it gets to be too extreme, count on the Fed to lower rates. But the Fed doesn't want to be lowering and raising rates to take the temperature of the economy that often. It's very unusual to see this many rate hikes in a row. That means, obviously, inflation's been the problem. This is the only remedy for it. Will they switch gears and start to turn around and lower interest rates next year? Doubtful, but they may pause. And investors are finally seeing when the Fed's going to pause, which is why you've seen the stock market rally so much in the past couple of days.
And Caleb, is there a schedule that's been laid out for any of this, or are we still kind of playing it by ear?
Yeah, we've never been through anything like this before, but there is a schedule or at least a roadmap, and that's the most boring chart in economics. It's called the Federal Reserve's dot plot. That's where Fed presidents and Fed folks who vote on interest rates think interest rates should be going out 6, 12, 18 months. And if you look at the dot plot, it'll be released tomorrow when the Fed makes its decision on interest rates. We're going to see where most of those Fed presidents and those voters on the FOMC want inflation and interest rates to be out into the future.
I suspect the most boring piece of data, unless you're trying to buy or sell a house right now, right?
Yeah, it's big, and nobody pays attention to it until we have to pay attention to it. And now all eyes are going to be on the dot plot tomorrow. We see that the final rate where the Fed will stop raising rates somewhere around 5%. We're at about 3.75-4% right now. They'll raise rates another 0.5% tomorrow. So consider the fact that we'll have a few more rate hikes into 2023 before this is over.
Caleb, thanks so much. We'll check back with you soon. And still to come, an update at the border. The Biden administration is working on some big changes for asylum seekers as a crisis grows at the southern border. We're going to take a closer look when Now Tonight continues. Now let's head to the southern border. The number of migrants crossing into El Paso, Texas is surging. By some estimates, as many as 1,000 migrants crossed the border on Sunday night alone. According to the chief of the U.S. Border Patrol's El Paso sector, that brings the 3-day weekend average to roughly 2,400 daily encounters. This comes as a policy known as Title 42 is ending December 21st. That policy, put in place during COVID, expelled asylum seekers under a public health emergency. And now the Biden administration's immigration policy could start shifting as well. NBC's Julia Ainsley has more. Julia?
We're learning more details now about the Biden administration's plan to drastically decrease the number of immigrants who would qualify for asylum when crossing the U.S. border. This is actually taking a page out of the Trump immigration plan. There was a similar plan developed by hardliner Stephen Miller, known as a transit ban, that capped asylum for immigrants who passed through other countries and did not claim asylum there first. But these new details also reveal new pathways the Biden administration would open up, including pathways for Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Haitians who could apply to come to the United States from their home countries. But as is often the case, we've seen the case with Venezuelans, when these new legal pathways open up, they often are just for a very small number of migrants. In the case of Venezuela, only about 24,000 were allowed in. We still have to see how many the Biden administration would allow in under this new plan. But sometimes immigration advocates will compare this to slamming a door and cracking a window. In fact, we've already heard from immigration advocates, as well as some people within the administration who disagree with this policy, who say the Biden administration will likely be sued and that they need to realize that the numbers at the border are not part of a surge. They're part of a new reality. The Department of Homeland Security has not confirmed these new details and say that these plans are still very much in flux. But Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas did speak to NBC's Jacob Soboroff yesterday. He was asked about a transit plan. Here's what he had to say.
Would you consider, as DHS Secretary, a transit ban? I would have to see what is specifically proposed to understand what it provides for, what it doesn't provide for.
So you can see he's not committing to it, but he's not denying it. And from 4 sources that I have spoken to who are deeply involved and have been briefed on these plans, they say that the Department of Homeland Security is already starting to train personnel, that would be asylum officers, and how to interview migrants under these new eligibility requirements. This is all coming as per court order. Those COVID-19 restrictions known as Title 42 are set to lift next week, and the numbers crossing the border is expected to rise. That's why the Biden administration is scrambling to come up with new policies, even those that may come as a surprise to many Democrats and people within the party who wouldn't think that this would be the way they would go.
Julia, thank you. And just as the Christmas travel rush is about to kick off, we have news on the biggest deal ever to buy commercial airliners in the United States. United Airlines is ordering hundreds of planes from Boeing as it retires older models and tries to offer improved customer comforts. NBC's Tom Costello has more.
The size of the deal is staggering, potentially worth up to $43 billion.
You ready to build us some airplanes?
United Airlines betting big that the post-pandemic travel boom is here to stay, ordering 200 planes from Boeing, including the biggest order ever domestically for the wide-body 787, as United phases out older models for better fuel economy and more passenger room. United CEO Scott Kirby.
Larger windows, lighting, bigger overhead bins, everything about the airplane was designed to be the next generation for customers.
Boeing, one of America's biggest manufacturers, has struggled following 2 fatal 737 MAX crashes overseas, quality control, supply chain, and production slowdowns.
This order is a testimony to the post-MAX Boeing, in my opinion, and the 87 in particular.
Tens of thousands of jobs nationwide, now more secure.
This deal comes as travel is surging worldwide. Boeing can't make planes fast enough. And now the Christmas travel rush is just a week away.
AAA estimates 112 million Americans will travel between the 23rd and the 2nd, the 3rd busiest on record. While good weather helped smooth out travel over Thanksgiving, blizzard conditions are today rolling across the country.
You guys are ready for Christmas?
We absolutely are ready. And because we've built more slack into the system, even when there's weather, we have more flexibility and ability to respond. And particularly keep the weather from bleeding over into the rest of the system.
United says it's hiring 2,400 pilots a year, predicting its planes will fly full for years to come. Tom Costello, NBC News, Charleston, South Carolina.
Thanks, Tom. And after the break, some other big headlines we're keeping an eye on, including Argentina snagging a spot at the World Cup final. We've got the highlights. Plus, the oldest member of K-pop's BTS is starting his mandatory military service, and a scientific breakthrough being called a BFD. What you need to know about the future of nuclear fusion.
We have finally, human beings have actually recreated on Earth the energy generation mechanism that occurs in the sun. We're literally tapping cosmic forces here to generate energy.
And now time for some of the headlines we're following tonight.
I see your true colors, and that's why I love you.
That's Cyndi Lauper performing at the White House today at the signing ceremony for the Respect for Marriage Act. Same-sex and interracial marriages are now federally protected under this legislation. President Biden making it official nearly a decade after he first came out in public support of same-sex marriages. A bipartisan Senate subcommittee presented findings today from an 8-month investigation into sexual abuse at federal prisons. The report unveiled that male employees sexually abused female prisoners in at least 2/3 of federal prisons that have held women over the past decade. That is 19 different facilities and thousands of cases alleging sexual abuse. New developments from the January 6th committee as the due date of their final report nears. The chair of the panel, Bernie Thompson, telling NBC News today the last public meeting has been moved up 2 days to this coming Monday. That's when we could hear about any criminal referrals. And then by Wednesday, the 21st, the final report by the committee is expected to be released. And here in L.A., Megan Thee Stallion took the stand in a high-profile trial between her and fellow rapper Tory Lanez. Stallion recounting her versions of events today, publicly accusing Lanez of shooting her in the foot back in 2020. If convicted, Tory Lanez could face nearly 23 years in prison. In South Korea, K-pop megastar Jin began his 18 months of mandatory military service. At 30 years old, he is the oldest and first member of the group BTS to serve. Jin's 6 younger bandmates are also expected to enlist in the future, meaning BTS will be on hiatus for at least a few years. And U.S. scientists have achieved something that has been promised by physicists for at least a half a century now. And no, we're not talking about nuclear fusion. We cracked nuclear fusion way back in the day when the hydrogen bomb was developed in the 50s. What we're talking about is a magic little ratio that happened when scientists created fusion from the most powerful set of lasers in the world. Now, quick refresher for those of us who didn't do too great in physics. Nuclear fusion is that process that powers the sun. That's when the nuclei of atoms collide under extreme temperatures and then make an insane amount of energy. Well, up until now, humans have basically been able to do that pretty regularly, but in our experiments in controlled settings, we've never been able to put out more energy than we put in. Until last week, when scientists at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California made a breakthrough. We shot 2 megajoules of energy into something and got 3 megajoules back. Magic! That is a milestone that is years in the making and a crucial step forward in achieving limitless clean energy.
It's the first time it has ever been done in a laboratory, anywhere in the world. Simply put, this is one of the most impressive scientific feats of the 21st century.
Gotti, scientists have spent billions of dollars and literally decades trying to do what these scientists at the Lawrence Livermore Lab out in California were able to do, which is create that fusion reaction ignition that takes place in the core of the sun and actually create more energy coming out of this reaction than they put in. And the reason that's important is because that could potentially open up a pathway to be able to create unlimited amounts of energy that could then be used for electricity without creating the greenhouse gases that come along with combustion, with burning fossil fuels and lead to climate change. And so this could potentially be a solution that could help us to be able to continue doing all of the things as modern human beings that we like to do, from heating our homes to driving our cars and flying our airplanes, without causing more global warming. The Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm announced this earlier today in Washington, where she explained this about why it's so significant.
Private sector investment in fusion research is already booming. It has reached nearly $3 billion in last year alone, and we've heard from professors that interest among students has never been higher, which is terrific. And that's why the Biden-Harris administration is aiming to capitalize on this moment.
But, Gotti, it's going to be a while before any of us are relying on fusion power plants. In fact, officials today at the Energy Department said that it's not probably a matter of years, but it's not a matter of centuries either. We're probably looking at the next several decades that scientists will be able to scale this up, because right now they were only able to create this reaction for a tiny fraction of a second, and it used a laser that can only fire once per day. They're going to have to be able to rapidly ramp that up, make this the kind of thing that can provide long-lasting and reliable power, and then deploy it to different parts of the country and the world, that is something that scientists are comparing to the evolution of electric vehicles, where just a few decades ago there were prototypes, there was proof of concept, there weren't widely available commercial electric vehicles. Today there are, and someday in the future, we may all be getting our electricity clean from fusion. Gotti?
Josh, thanks so much. Astrophysicist Paul Sutter joins me now. He's also a professor at the Institute of Advanced Computational Science at Stony Brook University. First, Paul, just to quickly break this all down again so we can understand it. Scientists at Lawrence Livermore fired up like 192 lasers, roughly the size of a football field, then shot them at this thing the size of a peppercorn, and the math worked out to like 2 megajoules in, 3 megajoules out, which means that's more than we put in, right?
Exactly. And to give you some perspective, a few megajoules is not a lot of energy. That's enough energy to, say, boil a few gallons of water. So we're not talking about massive sources of energy here. What we're talking about are differences in energy, which is important. Like you mentioned, it's relatively easy. We've been doing it for over a century to fuse atoms together, to take hydrogen and squeeze it together and turn it into helium and get a little bit of energy out. It's much more difficult to set up a system, make it just right so that you get more energy out than what you put in. And that's what they've achieved.
Now, I don't want to do a want moment here, but I did a little bit of digging, got very excited about all the headlines that we're seeing, right? And then you start reading that it took, to charge up those lasers, it actually took something like 300 megajoules from the grid, and then the 3 megajoules produced is that tiny drop in the bucket. So the question is, how much work do we have to do to make something that we can actually produce a large amount of electricity with?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I'm glad you've done your homework on this, because what we found is with this reaction is we are able to get more energy out than what the lasers had in going into the target. But the lasers themselves aren't very efficient. They only delivered around 0.5% of the electricity that we put into this massive stadium-sized facility onto the target itself. So we would need an efficiency hundreds of times bigger to actually get more energy out than what we put in. And we would need to develop a method to capture that energy, to turn it into heat, to drive a turbine, to generate electricity. None of that is here at the National Ignition Facility, but that's fine. That's fine, because that's not what the National Ignition Facility is for.
Well, Paul, look, I'm not trying to diminish this achievement. I'm very excited about all this. But you were just talking about that facility. This is something that scientists thought we were going to first figure out like way back in the 70s. And even that facility, it's using decades-old tech that was built like before the iPhone came out, right? So does this underscore how important it is, how hard it is to fund this type of stuff?
Exactly. Like science and technology and advancement, it doesn't happen by magic. It's not like there's this one weird trick of the universe that we need to figure out and all of a sudden we'll have limitless nuclear energy. It takes work. It takes hard work. It takes investment, and it takes patience, and it takes thousands of creative, ingenious scientists and engineers working around the clock. And we're not going to get to nuclear fusion power overnight. We're going to get there by lots of sleepless nights, by lots of work, by lots of grit and determination. And we do need to celebrate every step along the way, because we didn't even think this would be possible. The net gain that we got out of this experiment a few years ago, we didn't think it would be on the horizon. We thought it'd be decades until we got here. But now we're here, and we can start talking about the next step.
I can't wait for that next step to happen. Thanks so much, Paul.
Thank you so much.
And now we want to share a special story about two strangers meeting for the first time, even though technically they are now related by blood. And no, this isn't some story about a long-lost sibling. Instead, this is a story about how far we've come with modern medicine and about the power of your stem cells to save someone else's life. Take a look.
In a Utah canyon straight out of a postcard.
It's beautiful. Oh, my gosh.
Maggie Cambora and Ron Wardley are just getting to know each other.
It's all sinking in now. It hasn't sank in before.
A new friendship that almost didn't happen.
You go from being a healthy mom to
being on your deathbed. It sounds morbid, but it's true.
A mother of two and hairdresser from Illinois, Maggie was 38 when she was diagnosed with cancer.
It was a downward spiral, very, very quick. And the ER doctor, she came in and she's like, you know, we ran some tests and I saw blasts in your blood and your bone marrow. She's like, and honey, I believe you have leukemia. And I looked at her and I'm like, what? I'm like, that's a childhood cancer.
Maggie was treated for acute myeloid leukemia, but after 3 rounds of chemo and 1 stem transplant, nothing worked. Her only hope, finding another stem donor that would hopefully be a better match.
And the doctors pretty much told my husband that there was nothing that they could do. And I remember laying on my side, just praying so hard that there was a donor out there that could save my life, because there's no way I could leave this planet.
And when that light finally came, what did it look like?
I think they said, we found a donor. We found a perfect donor. We found a 10 out of 10. His DNA is so close to yours, he could be your brother.
That transplant worked, and within days, Maggie's body accepted the stem cells, which began making new blood free of cancer. But as she started to heal, what Maggie wanted more than anything was to meet the person who saved her life.
Here we go.
Now, 19 months after that life-saving donation, Maggie is meeting that man for the very first time.
Hi. Oh my God.
But how the lives of these two strangers became so intertwined is a miracle that began like any other day for Ron.
How did you get involved?
DKMS did a donor drive, and they were signing people up, which is just an easy cheek swab. And I have a close family friend that suffered and passed away from leukemia, so for me it wasn't a question in my mind to sign up.
3 years later, Ron got the call that he was a DNA match.
At first I was like, wow, you almost forgot that you registered, but at the same time it wasn't really a question or hesitation for me. Like, if I can help somebody, I will.
Through a process that extracts stem cells from a series of blood draws, Ron was able to donate 21 million cells that were immediately flown to Maggie 2,000 miles away.
What was it like seeing it?
What do you say to the person who saved your life besides thank you? Just the most selfless act you could ever. He's not only saved me, he saved my family.
There's no words that need to be said. Like, we just embraced and we both knew, you know.
And you just have that connection. And we're always going to have that connection for the rest of our lives.
I know you're a man of few words.
That's just because it's not about me. It's not my story. This is about Maggie.
But this is about you. You took the time to do it, and if you hadn't, I wouldn't be here. And my children, they wouldn't have a mom, and my husband wouldn't have a kid.
Any words?
I would do it again.
Oh, what a remarkable story. And in the time it took to do that story, we actually did cheek swabs here in the studio a few days ago, and then we sent them off in the mail. It is that easy to send off those stem cells. And one half of the World Cup is finally set. Argentina will play either France or Morocco after a dominant victory over Croatia in the first semifinal. NBC News foreign correspondent Megan Fitzgerald is in Doha with the latest.
Argentina is advancing to the finals, beating Croatia 3-0. Now look, both teams came out aggressive. We didn't see a point on the board until 34 minutes into the game. Lionel Messi with a penalty kick, sinking the ball in the right-hand corner of the net. Then, a couple of minutes later, another goal. 2-0 Argentina heading into the half. They finally shut the game down in the second half, 3-0 over Argentina. Fans are so excited. Take a listen. Argentina just pulled off the win. How are you feeling right now?
Oh, I'm feeling very, very, very happy.
Amazing. I can't even describe it. Like, it's amazing. Messi is for real to go. Like, yeah.
they win the World Cup, do you think?
They might. This depends. It just depends on everyone's passion, because it might give more hope for Argentina to win the World Cup.
Now, of course, Argentina will face off against the winner of tomorrow night's game between France and Morocco. A historic face-off for Morocco, the first African nation to advance to the semifinals. All eyes on that game. And then, of course, the finals are on Sunday.
Megan with the soundtrack of the night. Breaking news now this hour out of Washington. A top Republican negotiator has confirmed to NBC News that a deal has been reached to help prevent a government shutdown. The current government funding deadline was this Friday, but the House already voted to push that to December 23rd with a short-term resolution. So this news tonight, on top of the extended deadline, significantly reduces the odds of a government shutdown. Tune in to NBC News Now tomorrow for more details on this developing story. And whether it's 1 month or 10 years, the pain after a shooting never fully goes away. Sandy Hook families have been coping with the tragedy for a decade now. After the break, we're going to check in with a family member of one of the victims on this very important anniversary and talk about the progress on gun safety.
You can choose to curl up in a ball, or you can choose to focus on the good. And sometimes that good is just a nugget of a sunrise or a person stepping in and just enveloping you with love. I think that for me, choosing on the goodness and staying focused on the good that has clearly come my way has been my path to healing.
And tomorrow marks 10 years since the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. 20 first graders and 6 educators were killed. Most of those kids would have been 16, 17 years old this year. Now, back then, Barack Obama was president, and former White House photographer Pete Souza captured the moment when Obama found out about the Sandy Hook shooting. A short time later, Obama seemed to struggle to find the words about what happened. Take a listen.
The majority of those who died today were children. Beautiful little kids between the ages of 5 and 10 years old. They had their entire lives ahead of them. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, kids of their own. Among the fallen were also teachers, men and women who devoted their lives to helping our children fulfill their dreams. So our hearts are broken today.
And with me now is Eric Schwartz. His mother-in-law, Mary Jo Sherlach, was a school psychologist at Sandy Hook. She was killed that day. Eric helped create Mary's Fund, a charity dedicated to supporting mental health programs for children. Eric, thank you so very much for being with us on this difficult day. What do you want people to remember and take away? Yeah, no problem. And sorry to play that. We were struggling to figure out what to. We don't want to really live in those images. Sure. But that was just a moment that so many of us remembered, and it just brings you back to that tragedy. And I've got to ask, what is it that you want us to think about when we think back on Sandy Hook? What are you hoping that people take away from that tragedy?
Well, I think the thing about that clip is it was, reminiscent of a lot of the conversations my wife, father-in-law, so many in the family had, and that there was a lot of silence in between the conversations because everybody wanted to reach out, everybody wanted to help. But it's hard to find words because it's not a situation anybody was prepared for. So there was a lot of silence, a lot of what can we do? And 10 years later, I think we're still searching for a lot of those answers, unfortunately. But what we want people to take away is the memories of Mary, the memories of the other educators, and particularly the children. That's why, as difficult it is on these anniversaries, we want to take the time to learn as much as we can about those who lost their lives, learn what their families are doing, to honor those loved ones, because that's what we have left is the memory and what we can do to make sure that other people know that the legacy of those who were killed that day will live on.
And Eric, I know last month there was a memorial to the victims that opened up near the school. Have you been by there? Well, what does a memorial like that mean to your family?
We have not. My wife Maura and I live in southern New Jersey. We have not made that trip yet, but some friends of ours through Mary's Fund, which I'm sure we'll speak about, we've partnered with an organization, Tri-State Canine Response Team, that has therapy dogs, and they sent 5 teams up there today. They're up there today. They're up there tomorrow. There to support at the memorial, at the schools with the teachers who will still be there even when the students aren't tomorrow. So that way we will have a presence there through them when the time's right, and when my wife wants to go up, we will certainly make that trip. But we're certainly happy, like all the families, that the school was, in fact, demolished shortly after, and that they took the time to build something nice in the memory.
And Eric, you just mentioned Mary's Fund. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How can people get involved?
Sure. Well, right after 12/14 happened, like I said earlier, everybody wanted to help. They wanted to do something, but they didn't exactly know how. So we found out that donations started rolling in from not only across the country, but across the world. And we knew we wanted to do something with whatever came our way. So my wife, her sister, my father-in-law, other family members, they took the time to create Mary's Fund, obviously named after Mary Sherlock, my mother-in-law. And it was a charity set up in Fairfield, Connecticut, to help continue her work. And that's the tagline, continue her work, because she was the school psychologist. She cared so deeply for the kids in that school. So we created an organization that would support mental health and mental health programming in that area. A couple years after that, my wife and I wanted to do something similar in southern New Jersey. So we created a branch here, and we started it with $10,000 that had come in, and happily I can say we've distributed $350,000 to date to mental health agencies in our area. So that's on top of everything we've been able to do up in Connecticut. So it's important for us when we look at Mary's Fund to really be able to continue her work, continue her legacy. We have 2 children. My wife and I, we have 6-year-old Mackenzie and 3-year-old Olivia. And, one of the painful things to think about, my father-in-law, Bill, will mention when Mary had 2 dates of when she was going to retire. One was a physical date, and the second was whenever her first grandchild was born. And this horrible act prevented her from ever getting to see any of her grandchildren. So for us, being able to do Mary's Fund, even though, she never physically got to know her grandkids are going to get to know her through this foundation, through the acts we do. And I think that's what helps kind of get our family through it. I'm sure there's similar stories for other families, is you try to just do whatever you can to bring some positives. We've met a lot of great organizations, a lot of great people. And that's what we try to pull through, is that there are still a lot of good people out there, even as we continue to fall short in so many areas to protect our kids 10 years later.
Eric, it's so unfortunate that her legacy and her work is still needed today, but we can't thank you enough for what you guys are doing. Eric, thanks so much.
Thank you for your time.
And we'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. And before we close out our show, I know the news can be a lot, but we're trying very, very hard here to look through, sift throughout all those headlines. And sometimes they're not always bleak, even though you might not know it from watching the news. So we're putting together 60 seconds of joy every single day. And this first one, you might want to listen to if you got a thick blanket or a rooftop, because one of the year's most spectacular meteor showers is going to peak tonight into Wednesday with 120 meteors per hour. That's like 2 meteors every minute. That shower should be visible all across the sky, all over the world. So if it's not too cold outside, you might want to go outside and look up. In the UK, one baker is letting perfect strangers bake Christmas cakes in his oven, free of charge. He says he knows cakes can take hours to bake, which is an issue for people dealing with high energy bills. So now his bakery will bake them for you for free, and then they will even drop them off for free. So delivery as well. And a man and his best friend Jazzy were recently reunited after more than 7 years apart. That is Jazzy right there. After scanning the dog for a microchip, they were able to find her owner. And what's even better? Okay, listen to this. A cat named Mimi on Long Island has been reunited with her owners after a whole decade. The owners now live in Spain, but they're going to be coming back to take their cat to her new home pretty soon. Because you know what they say in Spain? Meow casa is su casa? Meow casa because of the... Okay, that does it for us. Here's hoping for some more good news to share tomorrow. I'm Gotti Schwartz for NBC News Now. Tonight, the news continues.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.